Hi, Chai Dodo, and welcome to my Corona Diaries. As many of you know, I'm a presenter at TRT World, but I'm currently in self-isolation, and that will be for another 12 weeks due to an illness which puts me in the vulnerable group due to the coronavirus. So as you can see, I'm still presenting here and aiming with this weekly show to explore the challenges facing those in self-isolation. Like me, many of you are in the same situation, in the same boat, and I will be asking your questions weekly to experts about the different things that is facing us. And I want to do this with understanding your input and humor. So today I will be joined by Robert Reiner, who's a psychologist and also Executive Director of Behavioral Associates. And thank you very much, Robert, for joining us here on TRT World on the first show of Corona Diaries.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Well, as we said, it is challenging times for all of us and all around the world. We're all in the same boat, facing the same challenges and the same situation, but many of us are in self-isolation, and that's bringing restrictions to our daily lives. Now, our viewers have sent in many questions, so I will start straight with one of them, which is from Turkey, one of our viewers, Cansu Okman. Let's take a watch and then talk after that, Robert.
Okay.
Hi everyone. As humanity, we go through a great test. All international flights were cancelled, interstate travel is restricted, governments warn their citizens not to go out. In Turkey, we're in the same situation. We are trying to protect our mental health. So I have two questions for you. My first question is, how can we cope with psychological impacts of loneliness due to social distancing? My second question is, how do I help others who suffer from mental health issues?
Let's start with the first one.
So, Robert, that's exactly what many of us are asking. How do we cope in self-isolation, and how do we also help others?
We use an acronym, actually, called 20B, B-E-A-D-S. The B stands for breathing. This is probably the best single treatment you can do for anxiety. Those of you who've taken yoga classes, you know that abdominal breathing, slow belly breathing, is one of the first things they teach you. And one of the problems we have with it is it seems so simple. How could it be so powerful? But it is. It has a cardiovascular effect. So if you practice slow abdominal breathing for about 20 minutes a day, you'll find that it'll decrease your general level of anxiety. And the more you do it, the more the effect will last. Now, you may not feel it in your moods right away, but after about 10 days, you will. The second one, the EA in the B's, is exercise aerobically. Many people go to gyms, plus can't do that anymore, isolated. But it doesn't mean that you need to stop exercising. Excuse me. In fact, it's more important now than ever. From my perspective, the only thing worse than a person who doesn't get any aerobic exercise is when a person who's used to getting it has to stop for whatever reason. Surgery, an epidemic. But that you continue the aerobic exercise. Now, I'm not talking about weight training here, which is important for other reasons. I'm talking about something that will make you perspire. If you're home alone, you can do 20 minutes a day of jumping jacks, ride a bicycle, an exercise bike, run in place. Anything that you can do 20 minutes a day will get your heart rate up over 100. It's very important. The third part of it is the DS, which is daily socializing. Make it a point to contact somebody you know on the phone, by text, by telephone, have a real conversation, or Skype them. But it's important, especially for people who are living alone, make sure that you have daily contact with the outside world, especially your good friends and family. You have
Well,
another question
Robert,
for me?
it all sounds, of course, very good, but it's very hard to motivate yourself, especially when you're at home and you're restricted to go out anywhere and you don't know how long this will continue. And you said physical exercise for those who can do it, but there's also elderly and also because of illnesses who can't actually physically exercise very much. So how do we motivate ourselves and how do we focus on these techniques?
I mean, you're making a good point, which is fear of the unknown. And that's what anxiety is all about. There's a word that we use called catastrophizing. You know, our brain is basically, when it comes to anxiety, anxiety is really an alarm system. And you know, the brain's chief instincts is to protect itself. So after 40,000 generations of humanity, we've got a finely tuned, very quick to react, hair trigger sense of anxiety. And we tend to think the worst. That's what catastrophizing is. Now, if you remind yourself of that this epidemic had a beginning, a middle, and it will have an end. Things are not always going to be that way, although many people, when they think the worst in this catastrophic thinking, will do that. I found that getting people to sit and write out their thoughts, you know, you can make a list of the rational ones and the irrational ones, and think about them. Try to actually talk yourself out of it or come up with more reasonable explanations for the catastrophic thinking that you're engaging in. After a while, it will have an effect. The things that you tell yourself do have an effect on your moods, and you can lower your anxiety by doing that. I hope that answered your question.
Now let's bring up another question from Nicholas from San Francisco. He's asking, and that's on Insta. So he said, what are good ways to deal with negative thoughts resulting from social distancing?
Okay. Talking about thoughts about loneliness and maybe feeling sorry for yourself or worrying what's going to happen. You know, once again, I found that getting this stuff out, writing it down, trying to talk to somebody about it over the telephone, we can still do that, is very helpful. If we keep stuff bottled in inside, it tends to feel a lot worse than it really is. Kind of like when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, worried about something you might have forgotten to do at work. I don't think anybody ever figured anything out meaningfully at 3 o'clock in the morning because we're thinking the worst. I usually encourage people in those situations to get out of bed. Once again, start writing stuff out. It's very empowering.
Well, next one, Robert, actually, I'm asking this as well on some way or another. Basically, we're finding it very hard to cope with our parents. Really, keeping them home has been very hard for them to acknowledge the situation or to cope with it. So I think many of us are witnessing the same thing. It's harder to make your parents understand what it means to stay home and to completely not go out to shop or do other stuff. So. And also many of us have to be separated from them and not be able to be for them. So that also brings us a bit of fear. So we have another question from Elif Kardesh, who is from Ankara. Let's watch first and take it from there.
This is my 19th day of personal quarantine, and I'm struggling with anxiety because I have aged parents and one of them has asthma. They're not even going out, but I can't cope with this anxiety and I need help.
So, Robert, how do we cope with this?
Okay. The idea of aging parents and them being cut off is a real problem. You know, you really want to break it down to two parts. All of us have deep concerns and worries about our parents getting older, and we all know that at some point, in all likelihood, we're going to have to deal with their deaths. That's inevitable. not much we can do about it. Now, what's going on right now because of the anxiety, remember that everybody is in a heightened state. There's a constant state of vigilance that we have. The anxiety also is an epidemic. So if you remind yourself, catastrophic thinking, which is entirely understandable and predictable, you can control it to some degree. It's not the thoughts that create the problems, by the way, it's the feelings they generate. And some of the things I talked about earlier, you can actually do. Distracting yourself actually is a pretty useful technique. Things that you can do to not blow the stuff even further out of proportion than we already tend to do. These unfortunate situations.
What about creating a routine? That's what I've been trying to do at home myself. It's day 25, and actually the first week was easier, and now I'm in the third week, which is becoming a bit more difficult, I think, with mood swings and ups and downs that I'm feeling. But I've tried to create a routine with my daughter and husband, waking up and homeschooling, and then some outside time in the garden, and I try to continue to that structure. Is that right, to try to take control of your life because you can't take control of the outside?
I think it's a very good thing. Try to construct a routine for yourself. It's a good idea when you go to sleep at night to have a pretty good sense of what you're going to do the next day and follow through with it. So I agree with you 100%. The important thing to do when you're trying to construct a routine is recognize there's going to be a period of time when you start trying to get into a routine and it actually takes hold, it's going to feel uncomfortable. My advice about that is ignore the feeling of it being uncomfortable and carry on anyway. It's the behavior here that counts, not the way that you feel about it. So put a plan together and make sure, no matter how uncomfortable it is, that you follow through. Learning anything new is going to feel uncomfortable, and you're certainly going to fail at it. The idea of learning something means you don't get it right the first time. So lower the bar of your expectations. But answer to your question, your idea of establishing a routine to try to get more control over your moods, I think is a good idea. But these are very challenging times. So,
and also,
while it's not surprising,
yes. And we've also come up with this. We've also come up with this routine as because there's 3 people in the house and it's not a very big house, my husband, my daughter and me. So with the mood swings and ups and downs, so in the week, one day someone can say, today is my grumpy day, and we leave that person alone. Is that something good to do?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, you may want to take turns every day where somebody gets to be a little more unreasonable and they don't face the usual repercussions. I was talking about this last week to somebody. When families are together 24/7, it's probably a good idea to bend way over backwards and tolerate some things you might ordinarily never accept in your day-to-day life during a normal time. So, you have to be very forgiving, very humble, and, you get easily angered or think you have a right to get angry.
Not always easy to do.
Not just the opposite.
But Robert, let's take another question from yes, of course. Let's take another question from Melika Yoldash, who is from Australia. So she's saying there's a rise of depression due to job losses. And also this, actually, we've been seeing in reports in the news lately, and it's becoming a serious concern for many, many countries. There might be a rise in domestic violence increase. How can this be dealt with?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think some of it is inevitable. And people have real legitimate concerns. Not everybody is going to become clinically depressed, but certainly nobody could ever see this as a good thing. These are very challenging times. The economy across the world is sinking right before our eyes. But, keep in mind, this is temporary. You have to remind yourself, this is not going to be forever. It's going to have an end one day. So we just have to kind of ride it out. That's the best I can offer. There's nothing really good about what's going on. The goal is to make yourself less miserable. That's probably the best you're going to do right now. To lower your expectations.
Okay, and also, of course, there are many parents with children stuck at home all day long, and which means you're not just a parent, but you become the teacher and full-time mother or father. So we have a video next from Fulya Jambai in Mersin. Let's take a watch.
What we'd like to know is, given the circumstances and having young children at home, what is the best way to keep them basically well? And by well, I mean like physically and mentally.
So what do you suggest, Robert? How do we keep our children well in this environment?
I would say what I just saw is probably one of the most challenging things a person has to face. To have 3 young children and be home alone with no break, that almost seems impossible to me. You've really got to remind yourself that this is not forever. Problem is you can't go outside. You probably best you're going to do here, just accept the fact that you're going to be really uncomfortable during this period of time. As far as worrying about your kids are much tougher than we think for the most part. I'm way more worried about the parents these days than I am the children. So, in that video we just saw, my heart goes out to the mother there. The kid's probably going to be fine, but that's just a brutal kind of situation. And I think once again, lowering the bar on expectations and making it a goal to be less miserable, less uncomfortable is probably the best you're going to do. That's a tough one.
Well, let's all hang in there, and it does still give us hope to see that. Well, thank you very much for answering our questions, Robert. It was great speaking to you and joining us on the first show of Corona Diaries. And so hopefully we'll meet you next week again. So I leave you with pictures from this week's news on coronavirus in Week in 100.